Well, that was fun. Well, welcome back to Authors on the Air. My name is James Latwell. I'm your host. And that was just a very brief musical introduction because we have so much we want to talk to Terrence McCauley about with his new book. Terrence, it's always good to see you, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, my friend. How's it going with you?
It's good. It's been a busy year for sure. But
Oh,
man, I am just thrilled to see the Twilight Town. Because I had a chance to look at the last book that's related in this series, and it blew me away with some of the things that were going on behind the scenes of the Kennedy assassination and all the intrigue that was going on. So
right.
we'll talk about that. But folks who don't know Terrence McCauley is, I call him the Swiss Army knife of crime fiction because he's touched on damn near every genre there is. He's written successful Westerns. The University series is still one of my favorites out there in terms of thrillers. And now you've got kind of a historical fiction in the Twilight Town and the Dallas 63 series, and it's just intriguing to me. So what set you down that path to go and look at the Kennedy assassination and everything that happened before that?
Sure. One thing that I've always been interested in is conspiracy theories. The big ones like Bigfoot and UFOs and ancient aliens, all of that stuff. And I never really bought into any of them, but I was more fascinated by people's fascination with them. And the one that I was never really able to explain away was the Kennedy assassination. And that's because there's so much to it that different people have seized on in the 60 years since it happened. Some people dedicate their entire lives to Dealey Plaza and what happened and what bullets came from where. Other people have delved into the background of Harvey Oswald and come to some really interesting conclusions. And other people have focused on the broader possible plot and who could have been involved in that. And that fascination fascinated me. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that I wanted to tell the story, but from a different angle. A lot of other people, and the great James Ellroy did this with his American tabloid. What was it? American Tabloid was one of them. But his trilogy about the Kennedy assassination and what happened afterwards, that was great. But he told it from a more higher level than I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell a street crime from the street level, the way it happened. And so that's why I focused on telling it from the perspective of three Dallas cops who are crooked in their own way, and or they become crooked as it goes on. So it was an involved story, and it was one that I said, I want to take a little bit of a different bent on it than others had before me.
Yeah, and I think I appreciated that because I think we've all heard the story or different versions of it. But when you dove in and went after the stories behind, Wilson, Tippit, and Denton, that just kind of opened up a whole new, look at that what was going on at the time, what was happening in that city, and the kind of corruption that was rampant through a lot of, departments at that time. I thought it was a really fresh way to do it, and it pulled me right into the story because, a lot of us have heard about Tippit, and what happened to him in the aftermath, but this was a way of kind of putting you into that story. You know what's going to happen to him, but you kind of get a different view of what led to that. So that was interesting.
Right, yeah, and Tippit is the only member of the three main characters who was an actual person. The other two are amalgams of other officers and other people who were involved in the investigation, because I didn't want it to get too bogged down in the details, because a book like this, if you tell it the wrong way, you're going to have huge sections of exposition, and that just kills momentum, and that drives the reader away from the page, because once it starts sounding like you're doing an info dump, the reader tunes out. And it's like Elmore Leonard said, skip the parts that people tend to skip, leave those out of your story. So Wilson is an amalgam of a lot of different people. Denton is an amalgam of a lot of different people. But with Tippit, he was kind of like the anchor. And a lot about him and his career wasn't really known, because at the time he was a hero. and he was probably an imperfect person like I portray in the book. But at the time, I understand why people didn't want to cover that, because he did whatever his involvement was. He was a hero. He did give up his life, and he was on duty at the time. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was a cookie cutter good guy. I try to portray him in as real a light as possible that I uncovered in the course of my research.
Yeah, I think, and the way you blend those three together and kind of bounce them back off of each other was a great storytelling technique, because you were able to unfold this story and give a kind of a plausible. I'm one of those people that I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I kind of want to know what was going on, and this was a good kind of a peek behind the curtain to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was interesting to do the research and find out the more interesting parts, especially for today's people, is the secondary characters, the tertiary characters. You can get lost in the motorcade, you can get lost in Dealey Plaza and why things happened the way they did. But explaining how it got to that point is, I think, a more interesting story. And that's what this is at its heart. It's a crime story that has a historical context. And the more I looked into the secondary people who were involved in this, it was amazing as many ties to intelligence as there were. Even the person who was, I don't get into it in the book, but Oswald's foreman at the school book depository was also an intelligence officer. And so, I mean, it just gets to the point where there's too many coincidences just to shrug them off. And, people like you and me, we've known people in the intelligence community based on our writing, or for you, what you did in your career, a little bit of what I did in mine for state government. But none of us have the ties that Oswald did. And he was supposed to be a nobody, yet he knew all of these somebodies. It just didn't jive with me. So that's what made me want to tackle this book from a different perspective.
Yeah. Now, Wilson was a really interesting character. And again, he's kind of playing both sides. I'm not giving too much away, but, he's kind of working with the FBI to kind of feed them, selected information on what's going on with Dallas and the PD. His role, was that something that was actually going on at the time, or was that something that you kind of created, or something in between?
It was something in between, because I wanted to be able to convey the underworld that was going on in Dallas at that time. And that's what led to me calling the town the Twilight Town. But, I could either describe it or I could show it to you. And so with that investigation technique of Wilson working against his own department with the FBI, you not only get a chance to see the level of that corruption, but you also get to see Wilson and how he's trying to make that work for him. So he starts out as a fairly gray to whitish hat, but ultimately through the end, he becomes a deep gray hat, because he's pulled in by what he wants out of this. And I want the audience to say, wow, he waited too long, and look at what happened. So it also shows he's smart, but he's not as smart necessarily as he thinks he is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and he kind of got caught up in that whirlpool that was happening there.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was kind of cool was you, in the previous book in Chicago '63, you had a Secret Service agent. I think it was a black Secret Service agent, one of the first assigned to protection detail.
Yes,
he made a cameo in this one.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and that's because when I was writing this particular novel, The Twilight Town, I had this huge section that I had written about Abraham Golden in my books. The real character was Abraham Bolden in real life. And I love the character, but I couldn't find a way to continue him after those events of Chicago. And it was too big, but for me, it was too good to just forget about and to cut out. So what I did was I had a bunch of people who were interested in publishing a book. I took that information, made a novella out of it called Chicago '63, and they are kind of related. They are definitely related. I do link to it in this book, but Wilson also makes an appearance in Chicago '63. But all of the plots that I discuss are fictionalized accounts of events that actually happened.
That I thought that was kind of a neat little moment. I picked up on that and said, "Oh, I remember that." So that was very cool.
Thank you.
Now, I know you touched on it. You've done tons of research around the assassination, around the shooting, and the events that were going on. Um, did that amount of research help you, or kind of hold you back when you were actually putting this story together? Because it could be just overwhelming.
It was overwhelming, which is why when I was starting to pitch this book, a lot of people said, "Well, just put it all, not a trilogy, just put it all into one book." And A, I didn't want to wait that long, and B, I don't think that today's audiences want to read a book that big. There's a reason why James Clavell's Shogun was made into a series, but when the publishing company re-released the book, they broke it up into two books, and that's because they figured people aren't going to want to read a doorstop book. And I think, given today's audience, that's right. But for me, I also didn't want to be able to jam so much into a book that people would just lose sight of everything. So I focused on three different aspects of the assassination. So this book starts in February of '63 and goes all the way through the event of the assassination. And it allowed me to tell the story from three different perspectives and get the information out that I wanted without it being too info laden. And paring back a lot of the events that did happen was a challenge, but it gave me inspiration on what directions I could take the book in. I knew I didn't want it to be a textbook or to read like a nonfiction book with quotation marks around different plot points. But this way I was able to tell the story in the way that I wanted and edit out a lot of the stuff that would have been too much information and didn't serve the motion of the plot.
Yeah, and I think that was a really smart move, because I mean this is clear, it's digestible. People are going to really dig this story. They can dive into it and completely get immersed in it. So I think that was a good call.
Thank you. Yeah, it's difficult when you're taking a story that is so iconic and was present in a lot of people's lives. Even today you have people who are up there in years, but they remember parts of it from their early childhood, and being able to relate it in a new way. Because anytime today's audience thinks of the Kennedy assassination, I know I automatically go to the Zapruder film. Well, back then they didn't have that.
Right.
That wasn't publicly shown, and all they had was what they were being told from somebody behind a desk talking into a camera. And they didn't have that kind of hindsight that we have now. So that also limited what I could say in this book. And I had to show you that these are people who are reacting to very limited information that was given to them.
Yeah. Now I had the chance when we were at Dallas BouncerCon to go to the book depository and actually walk the room and look down. Did you do that when we were there?
I wasn't at Texas. No, I've honestly never been to Texas, but I hope to be there soon.
Yeah, it was fascinating, because you can put yourself in these things that you've seen on the Zapruder film and on telecasts, and you can look basically out the window where that shot was supposedly taken, and it's not that far. I mean, it's always been portrayed as this huge, long, sharpshooter kind of thing, and it really wasn't that far.
Right. And the proximity of it is also an element too.
Yeah. So I think the way you ended the story, I thought, kind of fed back into some of those other possible scenarios, and I won't ruin it for folks there, but having seen that location and the grassy knoll and the fences that are around it, I could see that happening. I could see that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. Like, when anybody who's seen that view, people who know what they're talking about, I don't have any military or police training, but I know a lot of people who do. They said as he was coming toward the building, that's the time to take the shot, instead of him going down the hill
away.
And going away from them. It becomes exponentially more difficult. So that's why, in everything that I've read about Oswald, there were a lot of people who looked like him in Dallas that were running around acting like him. And that was before we knew of him, and that happened right up until the assassination. So for me, that was fertile ground for a plot point that I wanted to explore further.
Yeah. Now, writing Tippit came with its own challenges. Trying to tie that back to historical, what we know about him. But what about Denton and Wilson? Which of those two were probably more difficult for you to write?
For me, it was about Wilson, because Wilson is the one who evolves the most throughout the book. And I didn't want it to be, and again, no spoilers, but I didn't want his fall from grace to be like Icarus and be evident. I wanted you to not really understand what was happening until the last chapter. And then you see the results of his some of the decisions that he made. And in the second book, we see the guilt that he carries with him throughout that, as he's lost the president and he's lost his best friend and partner, and he's trying to redeem himself, and the odds aren't in his favor. But the story is about him trying to do it, not necessarily him being redeemed. So, there were a lot of people who inspired Wilson in my writing, and a lot of people who inspired Denton. But I didn't want to get pinned down to specific names, and that's why I changed around a lot of the names. Because anybody who is a follower of this assassination, for example, I don't want them popping up and saying, "Oh, well, Jerry Hill was never there. Croy wasn't there at this point." And I'm not getting into the weeds of that. I'm telling you the flavor of it instead. And that's why the fiction format for a book like this worked better for me.
Yeah, I mean, it had to be a challenge to kind of make that balance, staying true to this historical event that millions of people know about, but you give it that crime fiction flavor of what could have really happened out there. And I think I thought it was, like all of your books, this was really well done. So
thank you. Congrats. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the inspiration was from what I found, and I had a deep-seated interest already in the assassination itself, but the research definitely drove me on to say, I've got something here. And that's an instance of real life influencing fictional pursuits.
Yeah. So Terrance, what's coming next for you?
For me, it's going to be the second book in this trilogy. It is going to take place from the time Oswald is arrested in the Texas theater, and Wilson and other people doing their best to either try to free him, clear him, or accuse him of this implicitly. So it is very much a claustrophobic book. The first one is a little broader in terms of time frame, from February to November. This one is over 3 days, starting about a half an hour after Kennedy's assassination, and it runs all the way through to what we know happened in the basement of police headquarters with Black Ruby. But yeah, we know how it ends, but we don't know how we get there. And that's what this second book is about. So it's either going to be called Ring of Fire, or Tears on a River. I'm not sure yet.
I like it. So let's end up on something we call 3 quick hits. I'll put you in Wilson's headspace, and just these 3 quick questions. What's Wilson's favorite drink? What does he like to drink?
He is a whiskey guy. He enjoys a J&B now and then. And as you see in the book, his father chastises him for it.
Very true. And how about his music? What does Wilson listen to?
I think Wilson would probably be a standards guy. He would like the 1940s music because I think it plays more in line with his preferences and his outlook on life. I don't think he would have been a pop music aficionado from 1963.
Yep, that makes sense to me. And how about Wilson? And we might learn this in the next book. What's his greatest fear?
I think his greatest fear is letting his family down, because that is his motivator in this book. Yep. And yeah, it's his own ambition, but he wants to do well by his family, but he wants to do it on his own terms. And he's given a lot of outs in the book. You realize he doesn't have to do this, but he's driven to do it. And I think it's probably because he wants to outshine his father, who he loves. But I think he wants to make his own mark and serve his family well.
Right. And get out from that shadow. I love it. Folks, we've been talking with Terrence McCauley. His new book, it's out now, The Twilight Town. I think you're going to get a bang out of it. If you're ever interested in conspiracy theories or what really happened on the grassy knoll that day, you're going to want to grab this and make up your own mind. But I think Terrance gave us a great story to go along with it. So thanks
Thank
for
you.
spending some time with us here. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course, anytime, buddy. Thank you.
All right. You take care, man.
You too.